Hello, everyone. My name is Jeff Hahn, and I'm facilitating the afternoon webinar series for Corwin. So welcome today. Welcome to your Mathematics Formative Assessment Game Plan with Skip Fennell of McDaniel College. So with all that said, now I'd like to turn over the meeting to Erin Null, Acquisitions Editor for Corwin Mathematics, to introduce Skip Fennell.
Thank you so much, Jeff. It is my great pleasure today to be able to introduce my friend Skip Fennell, a man who really needs very little introduction, as he's considered one of the foremost thought leaders in math education today, and someone who I have had the honor of working with for the last couple of years on his newest book, The Formative 5 Everyday Assessment Techniques for Every Math Classroom, which he's written with his colleagues, Beth Cobett and John Ray. Skip is Emeritus Professor of Education and Graduate and Professional Studies at McDaniel College, as Jeff mentioned, where he also continues to direct the Elementary Mathematics Specialists and Teacher Leaders Project, which was the birthplace of what Skip will be talking about today. And his experience as a mathematics educator has taken the forms of classroom teacher, principal, supervisor of instruction, and he is also past president of the Association of Mathematics Teacher Educators, of the Research Council for Mathematics Learning, and the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics. On a personal level, and perhaps more importantly, Skip is one of my personal heroes for having completed 9 marathons, countless races at shorter distances, and he is the father of 3 and grandfather of 9, which must keep him very busy when he's not writing books for Corwin. And like many basketball fans on the receiving end of this webinar, Skip has also shared with me that his NCAA brackets are currently a disaster. At least that's what he claims. Skip, we're so proud to have you joining Corwin Mathematics today to discuss the ever-important topic of formative assessment, and I'm very eager to hear what you have to say.
Thanks, Erin. That was a very nice and over-the-top introduction, but also very appreciated. So let's get started. The title, Your Mathematics Formative Assessment Game Plan, is frankly about formative assessment, but I did, as Erin sort of alluded to, I mean, it is the time of this craziness from the NCAA's Division I basketball tournament, and some of us have watched, you know, probably close to 30 or more games in the last 72 hours, or seeming like it. So, you know, just like we got those brackets in order, maybe you'll get your formative assessment bracket in order too as a result of this webinar. That's clearly my hope. As Erin indicated, I'm still gainfully employed. I continue to direct the Brook Hill Institute of Mathematics Supported Elementary Math Specialists and Teacher Leaders Project that's located at McDaniel College in Westminster, Maryland, where I taught for 39 years. And what we do is work with elementary school math specialists, and more recently also middle school math specialists in regional school districts in Maryland, large countywide school districts. But we also then have a national clearinghouse, which is what you're looking at right now, where we have a lot of resources and we consult both nationally and internationally with math leaders indicated earlier in this country and around the country. So that website, mathspecialist.org, feel free to go there. There's a treasure trove of stuff, presentations that we've made, resources that you might like to use, and so forth. And as Erin indicated, this project, where we regularly meet with math specialists, has been the birthplace for a lot of the things that both Beth Cobett and John Ray and I have written over the years, and most recently, and a project very, very near and dear to our heart, is the Formative 5, which will be the focus of this presentation. But first, we need to hear about you. So I'm going to turn it back very quickly to Jeff for our polling question, so we can get a sense of those of you who are online currently, what you do and your connection to both this work and the classroom and beyond. Jeff?
Well, hi, everyone. I opened up the polling question. If you could answer that now. Thank you very much. We'll just give it another 10 or 15 seconds, and then we'll close the polling. So Skip, you should see the polling now.
I do, and it appears like this effort will be hopefully of interest for those of you in the classroom and for those of you who are connected to instruction or curriculum and the school administrator on the line. We hope to, or certainly I hope to meet your needs as well. And as Jeff indicated, hopefully there'll be some time toward the end of the presentation for some questions that you might have as well, and you can begin to drop those into the chat box as they come to your thinking or as a result of anything that I might say. So we're gonna start with this whole notion about assessment literacy, and frankly, what is it and why is this important, and so forth. And so one of the things that I have learned over the years in my work with teacher education is the challenges of the role of assessment in the professional background of the teacher. How does that occur? When does that occur? And so forth, so that the classroom teacher, him or herself, becomes frankly literate with regard to assessment, comfortable in working with a variety of assessments throughout their day, throughout their career, and the like. And as you can see on the slide, assessment of student learning is the responsibility of every school district, every school, and every teacher. And the reality is that for those of you in the classroom in particular, frankly, you do it all day long, every day. You may not pay attention to it. You may not even think that what you're doing is assessment, but in fact, it is. And so the notion of issues around assessment. And by the way, throughout the presentation, I have tagged comments from teachers that we gathered as we developed this book, and they reflect some of the particular areas of discussion. So for instance, why didn't I learn about formative assessment in my teacher prep program? Came from a first-year teacher. As somebody who toiled in teacher preparation for many years, this would drive me crazy to have a former student say something like that. But in fact, that's an impression of some others. From a person who's a fourth grade teacher, but frankly who is in this case, their fifth year of teaching, I never knew that my end of year or end of marking period benchmark tests were summative assessments. Thinking about how I can use both formative and summative assessments has been an eye-opening experience for me. Again, fifth year of teaching, you sort of wonder what happened previously. I'll come back to that in a minute in a personal kind of note. Because the main premise here is the importance of formative assessment, I would be remiss if I didn't, if you will, tie this package together, because formative leads to summative. And so while formative is frankly the day-to-day activities that provide you with lots of feedback to modify what you're doing on your feet, as you're delivering a lesson, as you think about tomorrow's lesson, as you provide feedback to students regularly. Again, these are things you do every day for those of you who are in the classroom. Summative assessment is more global, if you will. They're the typically used assessments that you might use at the end of a unit. The school district assessment that you might be required to give at particular times during the instructional year. I'm reflecting now on what happens in the school district where I live, and a number of my, in this case, grandchildren go to school, or the more high-profile, high-stakes tests that you might give, whether it's PARCC or Smarter Balanced or your own state test or what have you. So the fit, the connection between formative and summative sort of gets at that issue about assessment literacy. So I'm going to have us think a bit. Obviously, we don't have time to chat or talk about any of this, but reflecting back, when did you learn about assessment? Was that it at the undergraduate level? Was it closer to, say, a student teaching experience? How did that happen in your own, if you will, preparation? And then perhaps more importantly, what about now? How confident are you with regard to, frankly, all aspects of assessment that you encounter, the day-to-day formative assessments that we're going to talk about much of the time today, and or thinking about using, drawing material from or results, conclusions from the summative measures that you use in your school district as you gather with other members of your teaching team or the school where you're housed right now or what have you. And I have to admit, and that the last bullet here is my time to sort of, if you will, own up. My personal confession, I can remember vividly, I had no clue about what I was going to do when I had to give a test. I actually went, and I'm sure some of you did something similar. I went to somebody who was mentoring me, sort of informally at the time, and sort of said, do you have any tests that I can look at and get a sense of what I'm supposed to be doing here? And then I almost did the following. I almost used her test. I'm like, wait a minute, these are my kids. So, I mean, that's how green, that's how novice, that's how neophyte I was in this whole issue around assessment literacy. And I having shared that story, by the way, a number of times across this country, I'm not alone. So this notion about the mystery of assessment and the frankly unfinished job that we do at the pre-service candidate level to help people get ready for the importance of assessment is something that to some extent we all own. Certainly assessment is integral to everything you do with regard to your planning and your practice, because the results, the monitoring you do with regard to formative assessment helps influence your planning and your teaching. And the notion of, and here's where formative comes into play, this is actually how it was created. Linking assessment to planning and instruction is used to inform teaching and learning. So formative assessment is that kind of assessment, those assessment techniques that really kind of help you with regard to your teaching and obviously the learning of the students in which you're in charge of for however many days it might be this year, and then seemingly for much of their lives. So it really guides what we're doing here. And again, several times I'll just have us take a couple of seconds to reflect as we move through this presentation. Think about, how does your school or school district define formative assessment? As you think about your colleagues, is there a building-wide or a district-wide thought? Are there professional development materials? Are there professional development opportunities? Are there discussions about, this is what we believe in relative to formative assessment. This is our stance. This is what we do with regard to this pretty important discussion, if you haven't had it. Pretty important opportunity to actually put some thoughts down with regard to the school's policy, if you haven't already done so. And then sort of very directly, what about you? How do you use formative assessment yourself? How did you use it today? Because you did. How might you be using it tomorrow and or next week? Or do you think about, this as you actually do your lesson planning and teaching? Because again, this is in large measure what we're going to be talking about much of the time in this webinar. And the reality is that, while some say that, well, formative assessment is trendy and people are talking about it a lot and so forth, which is true. But the reality is we know a fair amount about it, and we've been talking about it in different ways for way over 60 years. And there's a couple of pretty dated references to give you some indication of that. We also know that through the work of Dylan William and his colleague Black and others, that regular use of classroom-based formative assessment makes a difference. And it basically has the potential to raise student achievement by, somewhere around half of a standard deviation, which frankly, if that were true and throughout throughout our country, we would clearly make an impact with regard to international comparisons, whether they be the PISA assessments with 15-year-olds or the grade 4 and 8 assessments through trends and issues and assessment issues in mathematics and science. So been around a while, makes a difference. But, and by the way, the connection to formative assessment that John Ray and Beth Corbett and I used when we began our work was the connection that we initially found in the research brief from the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics on formative assessment that's written by Dylan William and a colleague. And we really went after the notion of formative assessment being engineering effective classroom discussions, questions, activities, and tasks that elicit evidence of students' learning, and also the opportunity to provide feedback that moves learning forward. That's not to say that the other aspects of that research on formative assessment aren't important, but we focused on those in particular. And so if we, sort of pause for a minute, so we know that formative assessment's been around a while. We know that regular use can make an impact. We know we have some research that says, this is where this goes, and this is the focus of that work. But evidence suggests that actual day-to-day use of formative assessment is not as prevalent in classrooms as one might expect. And Stiggins, who wrote that, a little bit more than 3 years ago. So that's, after 50 years or so, we're not 50, 60 years or so, maybe we're not as far along as we might. So again, my colleagues Beth Corbett and John Ray and I talk about, well, wait, how do we get this started? And one of the things that kind of got us started thinking about this is a premise that I've had for a long time, and that is that formative assessment is not particularly well understood. As Aaron indicated, it was my honor to serve for a time as the president of the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics, the largest organization for math teachers in the world. And one of the things that I had to do then as president was to write kind of a president's statement, a president's message once a month. And during that time, I chose to write this message, which has a loaded title, and that is "Go ahead and teach the test." And I used that loaded title, frankly, to get people to read it because they would think that I was crazy or what's he claiming and so forth. And I was claiming that the fact is, as you teach, if you're really using formative assessment appropriately, you're assessing as you're teaching, and as you use formative assessment techniques, it's cumulative. You learn a little bit more every day, every hour, seemingly, about the children for whom you're responsible. And so this work got us thinking about it, us meaning the three co-authors of this book, but perhaps more importantly, the claims and the challenges and the demands of the math specialists, elementary school math specialists with whom we work, pushed us even harder because they were saying, can you give us something to help our teachers with formative assessment? It's not that they can't do it, but they're getting hit at so many different things about what formative assessment is that they can't digest it. So our thinking was to use the metaphor of the artist and the artist's palette to think about, first of all, that classroom that some of you are going to enter very early tomorrow morning is your canvas. And every day magical things happen on that classroom canvas. And we believe that formative assessment is a way to, if you will, paint that canvas. And we're going to paint it using formative assessment techniques that guide and monitor your teaching and learning and your teaching and the learning of your students. Because we want to get away from this. I just figured I could Google formative assessment and buy whatever formative assessments I wanted or needed. It's from a middle school teacher who talked about the notion of formative assessment within the context of assessment literacy. And you know what? I tried it. As I was preparing for this webinar, I actually did that. This is, maybe a week or two ago, over 3 million hits on the title Formative Assessment. So it is out there, and we are sending wrong messages. So this project, the Formative 5, really has been developed over stages. We've been thinking about this and doing some preliminary writing for years. And it first appeared on the scene in an article on Teaching Children Mathematics, which is the elementary school focused journal of the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics, in February 2015, where we began to talk about these classroom-based formative assessments. We then wrote a chapter in NCTM's Annual Perspectives in Mathematics Education that was published in 2015 as well, and then that's a copy of it. And then our big accomplishment, and this webinar is really focused around the book, The Formative 5, Everyday Assessment Techniques for Every Math Classroom, published by Corwin and co-published by the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics. And we're very pleased that first of all, Corwin really respected what we wanted to do with this topic of formative assessment, and really made what we believe is a highly usable text that teachers can use and use with other teachers, and hopefully make a difference with regard to their planning, their teaching, and also the learning of their children. And so we recognize this need, as I indicated. And one of the things our people were telling us, and we found this actually, was that, whether you Google it or not, there's just an overload of publications, published assessment. I mean, you can buy formative assessment, for God's sakes, which is ridiculous. Wait a minute, these are my third grade classrooms. How dare you pretend that you can sell me something that speaks to the needs of my children? So we basically took all that, and we distilled those endless suggestions into what we referred to, as I indicated earlier, a small palette of formative assessment techniques that drove the publication that we're talking about. And this, the Formative 5, that's our game plan for today, and the goal is to make it your game plan, of course, as well. So there's our palette. And by the way, as painters paint, they mix and so forth, and these Formative 5 techniques can be mixed, but they're observations, interviews, show me, Hinge questions, and exit tasks, which at the moment may not mean a whole lot to you, but after looking at seemingly hundreds of formative assessment techniques, we settled on 5 techniques that classroom teachers could understand pretty readily, could use, could quickly gather information from, and provide feedback to their students, and then use that to not only monitor their instruction, but guide their planning and sort of impact, not sort of, but also impact student learning as well. And we've been piloting these for now close to 2.5 years. So, I mean, what I can say candidly, and I'll say it towards the end of this presentation, is this stuff works, and we've got some, if you will, data to prove it. So, how's observation assessment? Of course, I observe my students all day long, every day. I just never considered the assessment potential of my observation. So the observation, which you do if you're a classroom teacher, you do this all day long. You monitor how your lesson is going by observing students. And the tagline by this 4th grade teacher at the end, for me, observation is my everyday formative assessment lifeline. Because this person will say, wait a minute, I'm always watching them work anyway. And now I can really, if you will, use this. So as we work with teachers, we regularly say, okay, you're planning this lesson. What's your topic, fraction equivalence, whatever. What would you expect to observe as that lesson rolls out? How would you know it if you saw it? What are the particular mathematical challenges or misconceptions that you might observe? And for those of you, depending upon your years of experience, you know very well the bumps, if you will, of particular lessons, so you can anticipate those. Anticipation, as we find out, is really important to using any of these 5 techniques. And then the last bullet, how might you record and provide feedback of what you've observed? Because maybe you want to keep, if you will, a running record. Maybe you're keeping that information in your head. As I mentioned earlier, you know, the more you're around and interacting with your students, the more that assessment becomes cumulative. What you knew about your class in September is way different than what you know about them now, because you've had all those months to sort of sharpen your view of what that individual can do or not do, or what have you. It's just a shot of a middle school classroom teacher using one of the tools for observation from the formative 5 as he's monitoring some kids doing some work with proportions. Throughout this presentation, and certainly throughout the book, The Formative 5, are a number of tools that teachers have access to electronically that they can adapt. So here's a tool that is basically used for individual student observation to sort of check to see if they're engaged early in the lesson, in the middle of the lesson, at the end of the lesson, is there need for an interview, and so forth. So what we found was that such tools don't need to be sophisticated or particularly elaborate, but just ways for a teacher to quickly make note and think about what they might do with regard to feedback to the students. So in terms of you and observation, again, this is one of those points where we'll reflect a little bit. You observe students all day long. What are you seeing? More directly, think about that lesson that you're going to teach tomorrow, for those of you who are in the classroom. And for those of you who aren't, just sort of think about a lesson. The topic is totally up to you. Picture any child in your class, one student, as that lesson is being taught. What might that child be doing? Perhaps more importantly, or following up on that, what might you do about it, whatever it is? And then sort of candidly, so why'd you pick that child? And hopefully this at minimum allowed you to smile a little bit, because, well, I always have to think about that kid or whatever. I'm thinking about a child who perhaps was really amazing today, and I'm hoping that he or she is amazing tomorrow. We have lots of different reasons for thinking about who we would observe in a particular situation, but the notion of using observation in such a way is really important in terms of how we're going to actually pull off, if you will, this particular technique. Now, the notion about, we'll move now into discussion about the interview technique as one of the formative 5, and a comment from an 8th grade teacher. For some reason, I thought you only interviewed those students who are having problems in math class. Now, I regularly interview my algebra students because I want to assess how they're transitioning to using equations and inequalities in a more formal way. We think of the interview as an extension to an observation, that you're observing children all day long as you're teaching and monitoring their progress as that lesson moves forward. And as you observe, what children will do will give you pause to the point where you may want to chat with them individually or in a small group about something that they're doing. I want to be clear that the interview, as we perceive it, is not deficit-based. That is, you're not solely going after kids who, for whatever reason, may be having a challenge with something. You sometimes want to interview a child because of some quirky solution that he or she has that you're thinking, wow, how did they get that? Because frankly, I don't understand it. This happens, and happens regularly, by the way. There's a long history about using clinical interviews with children, and what we're talking about is not a clinical interview. This takes a little bit of time, 5 minutes or less. It's pretty focused, one-on-one or small group, and it basically allows you to dig deeper. Tell me what you did there. Walk me through your solution to that problem. And our thinking here is that this really gives you an opportunity to give you kind of a glimpse of what the child is actually thinking as they work through problems in whatever area of mathematics the lesson might be on. Really valuable technique. So, and as we think about interviews, you have to make the consideration. What would make you decide to work one-on-one with a student or small group? Because that's what this would be. What questions might you ask? How might the questions be different from one group to the next? What will you anticipate from students? It could be, you could consider understandings and possible misconceptions. Again, interviews are not deficit-based. And then just as importantly, it's not only talk to me about how you did that, but what's the follow-up question? What if we change, what if we doubled that number? What would happen then to sort of get at where they're going thinking-wise? Or what if we added, two other manipulative pieces here? What happens to the problem then, or to the solution then? That kind of thing. So the interview does give you an opportunity to kind of, if you will, push the envelope a little bit in terms of understandings. I could claim that the interview really is pushing for understanding here, because you do have that possibility of small group one-on-one that you may not as you observe a full class. And then again, that reflection that we did with observation, I'd like to have us turn that around and think about that with regard to interviews as well. Think of a lesson. Again, it could be that lesson that you're thinking about for tomorrow. Could be one that you recently taught. What did a student do or not that might have caused you, or might cause you, to have a brief interview, 5 minutes or less, with a student? In other words, if we're forward-looking, we're thinking about the lesson. What might a student do with that lesson tomorrow that might push you to have an interview with a small group of students or a student one-on-one? And then going backwards, what did students do recently with a particular topic or lesson that maybe a quick interview to see what's going on there might have been helpful? And by the way, let me just slow up a minute to say that everybody on this call who's been in the classroom for any period of time, you're using observation on a regular basis, and you're using interviewing on a regular basis, and may not call attention to it to the point that I'm suggesting here. And that's what the Formative 5 is all about. These are powerful techniques, which to some extent teachers have been using for some time, but it's time, if you will, to sort of amplify them in terms of their opportunity to really influence your planning and your teaching on a regular basis. So this sort of gets at, you and the interview process, which I think is pretty important when you think about those kinds of situations. At first, I had no idea when I would be able to actually do the interview during the hubbub and buzz of my math time. What a great sentence. This is from a first grade teacher, but it frankly could be from any of you in the classroom right now. Then I just created this you and me spot in the corner of the room, and when I observed something I wanted to ask about, I just said, it's you and me right now. It's you and me time right now. The kids really seem to look forward to it. It's kind of like their private math time with me. So again, not deficit-based, but it allows, in this case, it allowed that first grade teacher to have a little bit of time with an individual child. I suspect you could do it with a small group as well, to sort of get at issues that they might have with some of the challenges that, in this case, her children were experiencing. Like the observation technique, the book has provided tools that, and I'm just showing you one, and also noting that these are available online, so that you can, if you will, create your own tool, fix it the way you want, or whatever. But this sort of frames sort of the basic structure of the interview that you would do. Tell me how you solved that problem. Why did you solve the problem that way? What else can you tell me about it? Again, pushing that envelope a little bit gives you an opportunity to jot down particular student responses and so forth and so on. So this is particularly important as you think about feedback that you're going to provide to students. And it's also really important in terms of, just accumulating evidence about students, because as I said, Now, I think for the third time, the notion of using formative assessment allows you to sort of every day update, your understanding about the learning progress of a particular child. And occasionally you're going to want that. Occasionally you're going to have a parent conference. You want to try to recall what particular children did and so forth. So you have this opportunity to use these, and this tool, among other tools related to any of the formative 5, provide you with opportunities to do that in a way that is not overly prescriptive, which is pretty important. What you see here are just some math examples. Can you show me how you would order some numbers on a number line? How do you know that 3/4 is less than 7/8? Show me how you know that. Show me your graph for that equation. We're using these, or I'm using these math examples to introduce the formative 5 technique that we call show me. We define that as a performance-based response to what you observe. And so you're observing a student doing a particular thing related to that lesson you taught today, or the lesson that you'll teach tomorrow. It sort of combines elements of both. The show me sort of combines elements of observations and interviews. I always refer to it as a stop and drop activity. In other words, it could be one student, it could be a small group, it could be the whole class. Show me how you did that. You're walking around the class, as frankly teachers all do, and you're seeing something, and you could just to monitor where they are right now. I want everybody right now on their whiteboard to show me how they know that 7/8 is less than 9/10 or what have you. And you can use a drawing, you can just use numbers, however you want to structure that. But it's that opportunity right there at that time to, in the moment, see where kids are. And these 3 techniques, observation, interviewing, and show me, really are used almost simultaneously. You're observing kids, you'll see somebody do something, you want to have an interview, show me how you did that. You 3 people, show me that. Stop the whole class. Let's show me what's going on here. The notion stop and drop is this happens to every one of you who are in the classroom. You just need to know. So we're going to show me this right now. I need to have a sense of where you all are on this. As with the other techniques, there are a number of tools for this one. This just happens to be a small group example of a show me. You define the lesson focus or the standard, and you anticipate what the show me responses are, and then there's an opportunity to sort of jot down what particular students might do. In fact, when we were doing this, piloting this with in our work prior to the publication of this book, we had teachers literally take pictures of what kids were showing, and so you could drop in the picture to actually show what was going on. And it's a lot faster than actually taking notes. So that's an opportunity to sort of think about what that might look like with regard to that. Again, we'll do a kind of a reflection pause here and have us think about, okay, it's your classroom. Are there particular lessons that you think would provide opportunity for more show me's than other lessons? Which and why do you think so? Think about that. Think through a lesson topic, any grade level, any lesson focus. Think about planning that lesson. What might you observe? What would you have your students show you? One of the things that we found as we were working with teachers is that for every one of these techniques, now we're on our 3rd of 5, the notion of anticipation is really important. And it directly links to your planning. You're planning this lesson. Here's the topic. What do you think we would have kids show? Why is that important? Back to the first bullet. We find that as we work with teachers on show me, that they often want kids to show them how they're using particular representations. Show me using your base 10 materials, whether 76 is compare 76 and 84. Show me using your base 10 materials. Show me using a number line where you might put 1.5 on this number line that goes from 0 to 2. Show me using a double number line how you might compare two fractions and so forth. That doesn't mean, and I want to make sure I'm clear here, that you're only going to use show me for representation kinds of activities. You might just have kids show you how they derived a solution to a problem. Again, note the connection between the interview here, except with the show me, we find that classroom teachers often use that with small groups and frequently the whole class. So other opportunities there as well. So in kind of tying together the first three of these techniques, observations, you observe your children all day long, is paying attention to what you're observing and monitoring that. Interviewing specifics is basically says, I want to know more about what I just observed. So it allows you to dig deeper, dive into that. Whereas the show me is an explicit performance of what I would like to see demonstrated. That's, show me your response to that. They're very connected, very much part of, as you're moving around the classroom, how you're monitoring, engaging student understandings through these three techniques. But we're now going to switch it to the latter two of these 5 techniques, and this one relates to questioning. And what you're looking at are 3 bolded questions about teachers and their response to questions and questioning and how they use them. Notice, I seriously think that one of the last things I got good at as a teacher was questioning. It took me a while to realize that sometimes I needed to change while I was actually teaching the questions I had planned to ask. And that's really important, by the way. That's a courageous teacher, because we've all been there. We have, you're playing this lesson, you have this great activity plan, you're thinking in the middle of the lesson, this is never going to work. I got to change this while I'm on, while I'm rolling here. So that's important. The better I feel about my planning, the easier it is to frame questions and then consider responses to help me plan for the next day. What a great response, because here's a teacher says, I know where I'm going with this lesson, and then I can use that. That helps me because, now I'm in a better position when I actually frame the questions that I have. So that's really pretty important. So we're talking about the Hinge question here. The notion of the Hinge question came to us originally from the work of Dylan William, and then we've tweaked it a good bit. It provides a check for understanding or proficiency at a particular hinge point in a lesson. The success of the lesson hinges on responses to such questions as an indication of whether students understand enough to move on. So it's a different kind of a question. It's not a discussion question per se. And you'll notice the Hinge question it occurs at a hinge point. So many of you who are in the classroom have lessons that are, I'll just use the phrase multi-topic. You're closing down subtraction, and then in the same lesson you're going to kind of bridge into something in multiplication or whatever. So in those kinds of lessons, you would have a hinge point question relative to how the kids are doing on the subtraction piece, and also another one towards the end of the full lesson when you've done some of the work on multiplication or whatever. If it's a lesson where it's a singular topic, a singular concept throughout the lesson, then it's a hinge question at the end of the lesson. But the notion of a hinge is, and I'll just sort of use this kind of metaphorically, it's like, the success of the lesson hinges on how kids do in their response to that question. I always refer to that as the deal breaker. How they do with the hinge is really, to you, the deal breaker on the lesson. But let me back up a little bit. and think about your teachers and their use of questioning, teachers at your school, teachers at your grade level, frankly, yourself. And what comes to mind? Can you picture a colleague who's really good at questioning, who just really on their feet ask great questions all the time? And then frankly, are there others who perhaps struggle with this? It's not easy. I mean, the teacher who said early on, a couple slides ago, how it's one of the last things he or she got good at, that is very true for most of us. It takes a while until you understand the content at a particular level of depth and how that rolls out within your curriculum to know what questions you might want to ask as you do that. My take on this is that, and this is my opinion only, but it's also, I believe, the opinion of my friends and co-authors, Beth Corbett and John Ray, is that kids really need to have an opportunity to talk about the mathematics that they're learning, and questions part of that. And then the other piece of that, where it says no questions asked, how can this be? It's from a very recent classroom observation I was involved in, where I was in the classroom for 45 minutes. There was not one question asked the entire time. I'm thinking, these kids are getting killed by worksheets, and they're never having an opportunity to talk about what it is they're engaging in, which is pretty sad. Our perspective is that the Hinge point, in a different way, monitors your lesson just like observation and interviewing and show me does. But the Hinge question is that it's a diagnostic question. It basically says to your class, here's this question, and the response to that is diagnostic in a sense, because it tells you, okay, we're good here, we're moving on, or we're not quite where I wanted us to be. I might have to go a little slower on this particular topic. This might need another day or so when I hadn't thought about that. Whether it's Hinge point or not is sort of relevant to whether or not you have a multi-focused or a singular focused lesson, as I indicated earlier. In our work, we suggest either, I want to be clear about this, either a carefully crafted multiple choice question for the Hinge, or a more sort of, if I can say use the phrase, a more regular question. And there's pushback on either one of those. It takes a little bit more time to craft that multiple choice item. On the other hand, as soon as you do that, you're going to have your responses back pretty quickly, and you'll know what to do. Whereas on the other one, it takes a little bit longer. Dylan Williams suggests doing this in something less than 2 minutes. That is, you pose the question, you get the responses back, and you're ready to move on, because you're doing this towards the end of the lesson. And again, it's not so much of a discussion as it is an assessment of what kids can do with those responses. So we call that the 2-minute rule, to sort of think about. I mean, these are just considerations that you have as you do that. So I'm going to share with you 2 different Hinge questions. One sort of set up as a regular question, and here's Emily. She's got 3 equally sized apple pies and wants to divide them into 8 equal portions to give to 8 students who want to take some pie home from a class party. So that's the context. The question is, can you draw a picture showing how Emily might divide the pies into 8 equal portions? That's the question. Explain how your picture shows the 8 equal, then that's the discussion beyond the question. Now, and that question's fine. It's good Hinge questions. We've used it in schools with kids and so forth. But it would mean that you'd have to get around in some way to see how they do with that. Same context coming at you in this. 3 equally sized apple pies, wants to divide them into 8 equal portions to give to 8 students, and so forth. Which expression represents this problem? Is it 3 times 8, 8 divided by 3, 3 divided by 8, 24 divided by 3? Notice that the notion here is that you craft those A, B, C, D distractors in such a way that you're targeting what kids would typically do with this. So whether it's a straight question, whether it's a multiple choice format, it is that notion of how's this lesson going? And here's my deal breaker in terms of thinking about that. Now, one of the things that we learned as we were investigating this topic of formative assessment, and particularly thinking about ideas for, in this case, Hinge questions, and I'm going to come to exit tasks here in a few minutes, is the notion that, wow, you know what? I've got a plan for multiple subjects, and this is my line. It's 9:30 at night. I am done here, and I've got to create this question. So these are some electronic tools that we often use with teachers, and teachers are using these more and more frequently. Padlet is used pretty commonly now, as is Google Forms, and Go Formative is a great technique to sort of get students' responses. And we highlight, by the way, pretty much all of these in our book, so you can actually use this because it's beyond paper pencil. What we find, by the way, with a lot of teachers in terms of resources for the Hinge is they just use every pupil response forms. They hold up A, B, C, or D, or they'll have tablets where they can actually create the solution, and all the teacher needs to do is move around the classroom to make that assessment. But the notion of the Hinge is a really, really important concept within the formative 5. So again, reflecting back on our piece before, how would you use the Hinge question as you teach? If you think of the Hinge as a whole class interview, how would you use responses? How you consider student responses, and the like. Like the other tools, there are online tools, or like the other techniques, there are online tools available for using these in different ways. The exit task is the final of our formative 5, and we refer to that as a capstone task or problem that teachers can use. And these, again, typically occur towards the end of the day. We on purpose don't call it an exit ticket because our experience has been that they're pretty trivial. And we think the exit task ought to have more meat to it. And you can see here we've revised a pretty easy task into a more complicated one. I'm pushing because I want to have some time for questions, so I apologize for the fast talk here, but I am monitoring time. But the notion of the task is something that's pretty important to us. And as with the other techniques that we provided, there are tools here to create the task and sort of see how that matches up with standards, both content standards and mathematical practices, and then thinking about expected responses and then summarizing class responses. Sometimes, as we've been doing this work, people think of the exit task as a whole class show me. It is performance-based, so there's that. You do have to think about time for students to complete the task and for you, frankly, to review responses as well, but pretty important. Summing up, both the Hinge question and the exit task are closure connected. They're towards the end of the lesson, and important for you to sort of say, this is where we are, this is where we're going. Responses to that Hinge and that exit task really are defining for me what my next step are. Those are the formative 5. I love the statement from Thompson and William that formative assessment is students and teachers using evidence of learning to adapt teaching and learning to meet immediate learning needs minute to minute and day by day. That really defines formative assessment in the classroom. What we know is that this stuff, the formative 5 works. As I indicated, we've been piloting this for quite some time. Teachers need time to think about and seriously connect planning, teaching, and assessment, and support is more than helpful. It's necessary to do this work. And then, we want to make sure that teachers have time to plan lessons, and I mean that very seriously, that classroom-based formative assessment is part of that plan, and both Hinge question and exit tasks are prepared as part of the lesson, and responses to this really truly drive next day's lesson and planning. And so it captures this notion about what's your formative assessment game plan. And I thank you for your attention. There's the project that I mentioned earlier. We have a couple of minutes for questions, and here we go.
Skip, thank you so much. That was a lot to cover in an hour and very informative. A few questions came in over the transom while you were talking, so I'd just like to share those with you. We have 3 of them. The first one is whether the book addresses high school teaching, and my follow-up question to that would be, what might high school teachers think about any differently? Are there any differences that they would need to consider to implement these techniques?
That's a great question. Our book is really based on our work we did with elementary and middle school teachers of mathematics. But since one of our co-authors, John Ray, happens to be a coordinator of middle and high school mathematics, I mean, he's using these techniques with high school teachers every day. Our examples are from the audiences that I mentioned, but as Aaron knows, I've had people in the field of science education come to me and say, you know what, this is perfect for science ed. Would you write this about science? I know nothing about science, so that's not going to happen. But certainly adaptable for high school teachers and high school children.
Great, thank you. The next question is from Jason McMelbourne, and he wanted to know what your opinions are with regard to grading formative assessment.
Great point. We actually deal with this in the book because frankly it came to us, and so you're certainly not going to grade an observation that's guiding what you're doing. You're certainly not going to grade what kids share with you privately in an interview, nor would you do that with a show me. Again, those accumulate what you're doing. Same thing with Hinge question, because that's guiding your lesson. The only aspect of the formative 5 that I might maybe be talked into a little bit with regard to grading would be perhaps the exit task, only if I pitch it a little bit differently than what I did in the presentation. I would urge you to take a look at our response to the whole issue of grading here, because I think a lot of the focus on grading a formative assessment is probably ill-timed and ill-advised. Personal opinion.
Thank you, Skip. Finally, the third question is about the hinge point question, and how many students struggling determines your decision to move past a hinge point or stay in the lesson, because one teacher says that she has some classes with a huge split in comprehension, which you can imagine is very common.
Yeah, it's a great question. Actually, we're doing a presentation on the hinge at the NCTM annual meeting in San Antonio in a couple of weeks, and we've gathered some data from some teachers. And I was just looking at something where she raised the hinge and like 25 kids got it. She used a multiple choice and had to show of hands and so forth and fun. She had 6 kids who did not. So she found a way to sort of deal with those 6 kids. I think one of the things that we found is that, it kind of goes back to, okay, responses on the hinge. If the majority of the kids, if you will, don't get it or don't make it to the level that you want them to, then you're going to have to adapt that lesson for the next day and maybe review some things rather than moving on. If it's a pretty wide majority of kids doing what you expect them to do, then okay, the deal breaker, I won today, and I can move forward. But again, that's first of all, great question, and something you have to keep in mind every day.
Great, thank you so much for all of the excellent points you shared today.
My pleasure.
I think Margaret O'Connor is on the line and just wanted to share a little bit more information about the book for those interested in learning more deeply.
Yep, thank you so much, Skip and Aaron. Sure. Just as a reminder to all of our participants, you will receive an email in a few days with a recording of Skip's presentation, as well as a certificate of completion. And as a reminder, Skip's book, The Formative 5, which goes into greater detail about the palette of formative assessment techniques he discussed today, is available on the Corwin website with a 20% everyday educator discount. So thank you again for attending.
Thank you all.